This is a map that could save European football. Not because the football is bad, but because the system underneath it is starting to break. And in this episode, we start with the diagnosis. What exactly is broken in European football and why? Because before you rebuild something, you have to understand where it is failing. Hello my soccer universe, my name is Roland and this is Football Talk. Over the last few weeks, especially in my Champions League and other European reviews, I've said more than once that the format, this new European format, feels actually bland and a little bit blah. And at first I thought it was about the format only, but when you look into it, and the more I looked into it especially, I saw that the format is only a part of the problem. The deeper issue is actually a structural imbalance. And the imbalance is that the Premier League has become this economic superpower, and then a handful of continental giants still operate on that level. Not that this is something new, but this is the current ecosystem. But beneath them, and this is the main thing, the gap is widening, and it's widening really fast. And that is especially exemplified by former European heavyweights like Ajax and Benfica. I mean, remember, in the Champions League group stages, half-time, Ajax and Benfica were bottom of the table. For me, as a romantic of European football, I know that these clubs are massive in their countries. And the Netherlands and Portugal are definitely huge countries in Europe. And to have their two biggest teams failing so badly, and even worse, them becoming feeder clubs, more or less, is something that really hurts me. And this is not due because they forgot how to play football. Yes, they had some structural issues everywhere, but they didn't forget how to play football. But the economic system around them has definitely changed. And that comes to then the fundamental question. Is this now just a natural order of modern football? Or is the structure itself starting to tilt? And this is what I want to explore in this multi-part series, probably one episode per month. And I want to get into this question. And today, I really want to look with the diagnosis. What is broken and why it is broken. So overall, we can say that the system is breaking, or at least I come to the conclusion. And the core thing is here that the problem is not football quality. At the very top level, it's still really high. However, the stability is rather uneven between the different leagues and the different clubs. As we said, the gaps are widening. And when I think about the identities of once huge clubs, they are eroding. And so it's not the quality of the football that's the problem, but it's how the benefits and the risks are in a way distributed. And we have to start on the top. The Premier League has enormous gravity. And please let me make sure, this doesn't mean that the Premier League is evil. It's not. It's just bigger. It has global media revenue. And in a global market, bigger doesn't just mean stronger. It means that it has gravitational pull. It is also responsible for a certain wage inflation. It dominates the transfer market. And it reinforces on itself growth. Because if you're in the Premier League and the more you're in there, the more wealthy you get. And that creates a structural imbalance all over Europe. And it isn't just a European story, because the same gravity that pulls from Spain and Germany also distorts England internally. You see that in the lower tiers, and we can go championship or even lower, the wages get more and more inflated into the point that if you don't earn promotion, you're struggling with financial survival. Look at what happened now to Leicester, that they have played a few times in the championship because they couldn't sustain their run. In addition, there's the parachute payments that completely distort the lower leagues, and that leads to a really big domestic imbalance. And it was even to the point where over the past 2 seasons, the promoted teams immediately got relegated again. So it's not only on a European scale, but we can also go on a domestic scale. However, in this video, I want to focus especially on the European scale. And it all leads to a so-called cannibalization effect. And what I mean by that, it's not that there's one league against another, but there's a vertical chain of extraction. We have the Premier League on top. And yes, this is simplified because I would argue Real Madrid, Barcelona, PSG and Bayern should also belong in this Premier League tierish here. But these are the leagues and clubs that are kind of destination clubs. The top talent flows there. But they extract the talent from the other major leagues. And this is now, especially La Liga, this is Serie A, this is the German Bundesliga, and I'm actually not quite sure anymore if we can call Ligue 1 a major league. Because I think it almost belongs already to the mid-tier. But I'm willing to put France still in the top tier. But these are the main feeders to what is happening in the Premier League. It is rare that someone from the mid-tier leagues, and these are now all these formerly great leagues, we can say Portugal, the Netherlands, Belgium, and then all the other leagues that have probably 5 starters in Europe. It changes all around, but I could throw in Switzerland. Austria is trying very hard to get out of that mid-tier at the moment, but the Czechs are really good. Poland is probably in there as well. Sometimes the big Nordic teams are also in there. So this is the mid-tier, but their next step for them is that they move on to the major leagues and then to the Premier League. And where do the mid-tier take their talent from? Well, from the small markets. And this is all the rest. These are the teams that get already eliminated usually before any of the group stages, especially in the Champions League and the Europa League, even start. And so what happens is that all the talent gets shifted upwards and the best talent lands in the Premier League and, as I said, to those 4 destination clubs. But also the value, it tilts very, very much so. The small markets are way more. However, they become less and less significant. And the same thing goes mid-tier, major leagues, up to the Premier League. This is the structure that we're currently dealing with. And now, there have been tries to actually regulate the whole thing. But the fixes don't fix most of the time. I mean, we have financial regulation. An obvious choice of getting this a little bit kind of in check again would be to have a European-wide salary cap. However, we live in a European market economy, freedom of movement and so on. There are plenty of legal barriers that will prevent it. So salary cap to me is not something realistic. And this is a salary cap that would have to be imposed globally. FFP and PSR rules. Yes, I think they have a good idea. You don't want big clubs or clubs generally to go bust. But they have been legislated rather unevenly. The big ones never really get punished. And they lock in kind of the advantage of the big teams. Then we have licensing structures like we have in Austria and Germany especially. But the problem is that those lead to a stability, because this is not only that you have your books in order, but also that infrastructure is there. This is very good for stability, but it does not equalize things. It still keeps the advantage there. And then we also have something like development incentives where, if you develop youth talent, you get maybe from the league a little incentive. We had that in Austria for a while. But as soon as teams want to play for a title, they say, no, I forgo this money because I can make more money by getting from another league a big talent, develop it and sell it on. And so this talent reward becomes a competitive penalty. Also something you don't want. And the main point here is that these regulations treat spending, but they don't treat the scale, because that is the major issue. It is scale, it's not the spending. And another part to try to fix this one is now on the top tier was of course the Super League, which now is finally dead. And the Super League was, I see it brought up as still, maybe we should have thought about this more, because now the Premier League is the new Super League. But what it was an elite control structure that had only reduced competitive access. It tried to replicate the American NFL model in Europe in a way, with fixed teams that cannot be removed from there. And again, this reinforces an incumbent status and it concentrates elite power. So while it might be good for big teams from countries that are not the Premier League or not England, on a global scale, this would not have worked, because it would have left behind the mid-tier and the smaller tier and most of the major leagues. That much is for certain as well. And I already said it. The problem is the scale. We have population size matters because larger population means a larger media market, makes it more attractive for sponsors, and therefore there's a structural revenue advantage. And I also have to mention revenue sharing here. Even if you have strong revenue sharing within the Premier League, this does not compensate for differences in national market size. Because let's say even if a mid-tier has revenue sharing, yeah, that's great, but it doesn't really allow you to rise because you're constrained by your market. Because that's what is for smaller countries. There's a lower ceiling. The domestic market is much smaller. The broadcast has much limited leverage. And again, I come back to Austria because that's what I know best. The TV contract in Austria is in a way laughable, and money has been reduced in the newest contract as well. There's also, because you're smaller, a limited championship sponsorship base. And have that in mind. This means now that when we look at the mid-tiers, that the mid-tier leagues that are doing well, they are usually also a bit more on the wealthier side because they also have bigger companies. But what is definitely true is that even when your league size is smaller, you reach the ceiling there quite quickly. It is impossible to really rise out of the mid-tier status. And once great teams, like I say, Ajax, Feyenoord, the big teams in the Netherlands, they are now nerfed by the new Champions League structure, by the general competitive imbalance. I mean, this was all good and fine when there was only one champion in the then European Cup, because then you could, with good work, rise above. It was also a much more level playing field because it was all more nationalized. But now it becomes more globalized. And that is the problem, that in a global market, only the top dog will survive unless we do something about it. And what I suggest could be, or probably should be done, and honestly I think it's inevitable, we need to start thinking about merging leagues in order to broaden the playing field again. Because the national markets are too small, but if you merge them together, the regional markets might become viable. And shared leagues would then raise ceilings. You just increase your footprint. And it also means that if you are isolated, you stay within the limits. So you need to think about the scale problem. Who are the big leagues? The big leagues are the ones that are in the big countries. And then in addition, the Premier League has the advantage of being in an English-speaking country, so mean you have immediate access to America without much upfront cost. There's not the tax that you have when you come from a Spanish league or Italian or German league, where language is a problem. There's an inbuilt advantage already for the Premier League, but if we at least can increase the scale for the mid-tier leagues, then actually this could make for more interesting competitions again. At least this is my thought. This is of course not a new idea. We had the Nordic League experiment, where I think it was Sweden and Denmark, did Norway get in there as well, that had an additional competition where the top four played against each other for a title. However, it was not really accepted because no Champions League spots were given out there. There are huge discussions between Belgium and the Netherlands to join their leagues. Makes a whole lot of sense. There is not too much difference between these two countries, and they are very even in size. And if you just take the top teams from each of these leagues, I think this would make for a great league overall. The question is always, if you're now in the Netherlands, maybe you have some smaller teams where you have inbuilt rivalries. But rivalries can also grow over time, especially if this league is now your pathway to Europe. We also had the Celtic League discussions because Rangers and Celtic were maybe trying to move towards the Premier League. Maybe they could increase their footprint by, going together with Ireland and potentially the Welsh League. Although it's probably for the Scottish Premiership not that ambitious. But, it's not the first time that we had cross-border interest. As I said, the two big teams from Glasgow going into the Premier League. I think there have been discussions for at least Porto and Benfica to join La Liga. And there's even been a discussion that Bayern Munich might join Serie A in the mid-2000s at one point because Uli Hoeneß didn't like how the Bundesliga was behaving with Bayern. So the idea itself is not new. The idea even in Austria is not new, and I want to really use this now as a case study. In Austria, when we were applying for the European Championship, for the 2004 European Championship, we did it together with Hungary, and then in 2008 we got it with Switzerland. Once we got the European Championship in conjunction with Switzerland, and Switzerland has a very comparable media scale, it's just Switzerland is richer than Austria. There were discussions about an Alps League. Let's have Austria and Switzerland join, because this could lead to a whole lot of synergy. The problem is you're definitely a junior partner there, because the Swiss league just has more money. It's also geographically problem. Austria and Switzerland have very similar geographic build-up. To get them from Switzerland, from the flat part of Switzerland, into the flat part of Austria, you still have to go through the Alps, which is also not really feasible, and then add to it that Switzerland is not in the EU. That's a little bit of a trouble. A little bit more obvious, especially when you look where the big teams in Austria are currently from, except Wacker Innsbruck. But let's face it, Wacker Innsbruck are now in the 4th tier still, so they're not really that much of a factor. But all the big teams are in the north and in the east. So expanding towards Hungary, maybe even include the Czech Republic and Slovakia, where you have huge historic ties. And these have been the heartlands of European football about a century ago, would also be making a lot of sense. So there's always this question, should we go with the economic power in Switzerland, or do we look at the geographic neighbors? But the main thing is that this is just the Austrian Bundesliga or the Austrian journalists or maybe Austrian top footballing officials trying to think about it themselves. Who could we do it? But they don't know whether there's a structure behind it. How could they do it? Should they even do it? Because, at the moment, many will tell you, I'd rather see Hartberg, a team that I know, than watch my team play against Basel, which are so far away. However, that is very short-sighted in my point of view, because, these rivalries can build very quickly over time. Same thing, of course, would be true if you play against Sparta Prague or Ferencváros from Budapest. Now, there's no structural pathway, but also, if you just look at the market, you will always have a merger. This will always favor the strongest markets. And from what the Austrian case study shows it, that I actually think geography and identity also matter. And most importantly, that is from the Nordic example, a merged league must carry the European access. This cannot be given through the smaller leagues anymore. And the governance must define the structure for this merging. And this is actually where I think that UEFA and UEFA bureaucracy can for once be hugely successful. Not make rules that preserve the status quo, and I understand the pressure from the big clubs, but actually work within a structure that allows everyone to rise. And such a structured alternative would be, of course, that we have defined geographic regions, that has a shared scale within the regions, so all the regions have roughly the same size, that the competitive access is protected. So it's not a closed league. So each league has only their top teams, and then like American style, no. There should be promotion relegation, and of course also European qualification has to be in there. That's what I'm proposing here. And if you agree with these principles, defined regions, shared scale, competitive access, then the question becomes, what would it actually look like? And so I tried to draw it. And so what you're looking here is a proposal to divide UEFA into 8 defined regional blocks. Within each of these regions, leagues could merge, not organically, but structurally, but only within these regions and under a shared framework. That is very important. And then in the next episode, I'll walk you through how I arrived at these regions, why some borders are obvious and why others might be controversial, and how this structure could rebalance European football from the inside out. Because if the system is breaking, it's not enough to complain about it, we actually have to redesign it.